Welcome to This Explainer. You know, there is this absolutely predictable, never-ending cycle in our politics. Have you noticed it? Every few years, a brand new candidate steps up to the microphone, boldly promising to save us from the total failures of the current administration. They tell us they have all the answers. So they win, they take office, their term eventually ends, and then, literally like clockwork, the next wave of new candidates arrive, claiming that they will be the ones to finally fix everything the last guy broke. It's a never-ending mind game played over and over and over, and the general public just keeps falling for it. Today, we're going to expose the actual mechanics behind this political illusion.
So, the really crucial question we have to ask ourselves is, why do we repeatedly fall for the illusion that one single human being possesses all the solutions to our incredibly complex national problems? I mean, we seem to conveniently forget that newly elected presidents are just that. They're humans. They aren't superheroes, they don't have magic wands, and no one comes with all the solutions. They are constrained by a massive system, yet we buy into the fantasy of a savior time and time again.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break this down into 5 parts: the political mind game, the psychology of the sway, the governing reality check, the disillusionment loop, and finally, breaking the cycle.
Starting with part 1, the political mind game and the strategic incentives behind it all.
To really get why this loop happens, we first need to understand the strategic incentives of the campaign trail itself. Those wild campaign promises, they're rarely literal, feasible legislative plans. Instead, they're basically designed as coordination signals to political elites, donors, and party factions. In this environment, the electorate generally splits into 2 groups. First, we have what we call credulous voters. They take highly ambitious, sometimes literally mathematically impossible promises as absolute fact. These are the folks who drive all that grassroots enthusiasm and turnout. But naturally, they're also the ones set up for the most severe disappointment when reality hits. On the flip side, we have rational voters. They know absolute fulfillment is highly unlikely. Instead, they're just using these wild promises to infer a candidate's underlying values and the general direction they want to steer the country.
Moving on to part 2, the psychology of the sway, or how campaigns exploit our biases.
So, why are voters, even the rational ones, so easily mobilized by these impossible promises? Well, it all comes down to how our human brains are wired. Political campaigns are basically master classes in exploiting our cognitive quirks. Let's rapid fire through a few of these. First, the bandwagon effect. People just love to align with a perceived winner, totally ignoring the actual feasibility of their platform. Next up is the false consensus effect. Politicians manipulate this to make you think everyone agrees with your common sense views, which instantly makes their opponents look like radical, extreme threats. Then there's the anchoring effect, where politicians set these mental benchmarks by making really dramatic initial claims about how terrible things currently are. And finally, the good old days effect, where challengers sanitize an idealized past just to make you dissatisfied with the present. They use all these tools to convince you that the current guy is failing, and they alone can bring back the glory days.
And what's really interesting about this is how it highlights the ultimate contradiction in what we actually demand from our leaders. Think about it. We have this deep, totally contradictory demand for a powerful, visionary leader who can solve all our problems single-handedly. But simultaneously, we have an inherent, historical suspicion of centralized power. We want a charismatic commoner who is somehow also an uncommon, flawless visionary. We literally demand the impossible from mere mortals, completely setting the stage for inevitable failure.
Which brings us to part 3, the governing reality check. Time for the harsh reality.
All right, the election is over. The new candidate, who promised to be fundamentally better than the current president, takes office. And instantly, this very human being smashes right into a brick wall of constitutional and institutional constraints. You see, the skills it takes to win an election are the exact opposite of the skills it takes to actually govern. To win, a candidate has to adopt a rigid, uncompromising stance to fire up their base. But the second they step into the Oval Office, the reality of a divided government demands compromising concessions. They absolutely must negotiate to pass legislation. But because they campaigned as uncompromising purists, their own supporters immediately turn around and accuse them of selling out.
Now, to be totally fair here, presidents really do try to keep their promises. The data shows that across recent administrations, from Obama to Trump to Biden, pledges are actively pursued. But because of severe structural bottlenecks in Congress, their methods differ drastically. President Obama pushed muscular legislative packages during brief windows of unified control. President Trump relied heavily on unilateral executive orders to just bypass congressional gridlock. President Biden utilized a mix of traditional legislative bargaining and administrative regulations. Yet regardless of the method, no one achieves 100%, and the public, still expecting perfection based on that soaring campaign rhetoric, perceives even these partial victories as massive, total failures.
Because, let's be honest, the system itself is fundamentally designed to stall. The bipartisan Simpson-Bowles Fiscal Commission is a perfect example of this. They produced a practical, comprehensive solution to the national debt. And what happened? It died a quiet, bipartisan death. Why? Because neither party was willing to risk the wrath of their uncompromising political basis. It just goes to show that our current political duopoly delivers gridlock rather than practical solutions, completely regardless of who happens to be sitting in the president's chair at the time.
And that leads us to this truly shocking paradox. Public trust in the federal government is hovering around a miserable 20%. 20! Yet this system operates with basically zero accountability, boasting a staggering 90% re-election rate for congressional incumbents. 90%! The public is deeply, deeply unhappy with the results, but the electoral system completely protects the political actors who failed to deliver.
That brings us right to part 4, the disillusionment loop, and the inevitably decaying honeymoon.
This is the exact moment where the magic fades. The presidential honeymoon decays, and the public quickly and reliably turns against the very administration they just elected to save them. Here's how the loop actually works in action. It starts with those sky-high expectations we talked about. Then, institutional friction grinds progress to a halt. This triggers what political scientists call the thermostatic feedback loop, which is fascinating. It shows that the public inherently demands policy moving in the exact opposite direction of whatever the current administration is doing. If a Democrat is active, the public mood shifts conservative. If a Republican is active, it shifts liberal. This backlash almost always leads to midterm election losses for the president's party, which is then followed by a sudden weird nostalgia for whoever came before them.
So, during an active administration, voters suffer from what's known as the 6-year itch. Constant exposure to executive compromises and daily policy battles just breeds contempt, but as time passes, we engage in retrospective simplification. The previous presidents suddenly look so much better in the rearview mirror simply because we forget the daily, exhausting grind of their term. And what does this do? It perfectly sets the stage for the next challenger to step up, claim the current president is a total disaster, and promise to restore the country to greatness, and boom, the cycle repeats itself.
Finally, part 5, breaking the cycle. Let's talk about systemic reform.
Listen, we don't have to be trapped in this game. This disillusionment loop isn't a law of nature. It is a direct product of our specific electoral rules. And that means it can be fixed. To fix it, we have to understand Duverger's law. This concept explains that political systems exactly like ours, which produce only one winner via a plurality of votes, inherently lead to the dominance of a two-party system. Our single-member district plurality system basically creates a zero-sum game. Think about it. If you can win with just a tiny margin of a fragmented electorate, your absolute best strategy is to breed negative, toxic campaign rhetoric to suppress your opponent's turnout, rather than actually building broad consensus.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference. Compare our current winner-take-all system against ranked choice voting. Under ranked choice, you actually need a true majority to win. You can't just rely on riling up your hardcore base and ruthlessly attacking your opponent because, well, you might actually need your opponent's supporters to rank you second. This completely changes the strategic incentives. It forces candidates to moderate their rhetoric, seek broad consensus, and actually run civil campaigns. Plus, it makes third parties viable without the fear of wasting your vote. It's a real game changer.
But, there's always a catch. Self-interested politicians, the ones currently benefiting from the duopoly, are absolutely not going to change this system voluntarily. They like the rules exactly as they are. That means citizen-led ballot initiatives and political philanthropy are required to force ranked choice voting into reality from the outside in. We, the voters, have to step up, fund, and support the infrastructure to change the rules of the game ourselves. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative question. Are you ready to change the rules of the game? Are we going to keep falling for the mind game of the next savior candidate? Or are we finally going to recognize that no single human has all the solutions and start focusing our energy on real systemic electoral reform? The loop only continues as long as we keep playing their game. Let's change the rules.